3 days after open-heart surgery, they told me I had 2 hours to leave. The nurse set the discharge papers down like a verdict, then turned away before I could ask a single question. I reached for my phone and saw my son's name. Now there was only a cold gray icon next to it. Blocked. No messages. No calls. Not a single word of explanation. Just a perfect, clean severance, as if 51 years of my life could be erased with a single tap of a finger. The heart monitor beeped steadily in the cold white room at Northwestern Memorial. Outside the window, November Chicago was gray and promised nothing. And in that moment, I understood something more cruel than the surgery that had just cracked my chest open. I had not died on the operating table. I had simply been erased from my own son's life while I was still breathing. I need to tell you this story. Not because it ends the way you'd expect, although it does end well, better than I had any right to hope. I need to tell it because somewhere right now somebody is lying in a hospital room alone. Somebody's phone is showing them that same gray icon, and they need to know that what happened to me is possible for them too. So stay with me, all the way to the end. My name is Leonard Webb. For 31 years, I drove a CTA bus through the south side of Chicago. The Red Line route first, then the 6 Jackson Park route through Woodlawn and Hyde Park, and the neighborhoods in between. I drove through blizzards that buried the city, through August heat waves that turned the asphalt soft, through funerals and block parties and 3 mayoral elections. I drove until my right knee gave out and my back wouldn't cooperate anymore, and I retired at 62 with a pension that covered my rent on 63rd and Cottage Grove, and not much else. But I was proud. Not of what I had, I didn't have much. Proud of what I'd done with what I was given. My wife Gloria died of a stroke when our son Derek was 9 years old. She was 41. She was watching the evening news, laughing at something the anchor said, and then she was gone, just like that. One moment she was there, the next she wasn't, and I was standing in a hospital corridor at midnight with a 9-year-old boy who had his mother's eyes and had no idea why I couldn't stop shaking. I want to slow down here for a moment, because I don't think people truly understand what it means to raise a child alone after something like that. It's not just the tiredness, though God knows you're tired. It's the invisible 1,000 choices you make every single day. You skip lunch so Derek can have new shoes for school. You work Christmas Eve so he can have presents under the tree Christmas morning. You wear the same winter coat for 11 years because a coat keeps you warm, whether it's 11 years old or new, and his college application fees are not going to pay themselves. Every decision runs through one filter. What does Derek need? That's not martyrdom. That's just love with nowhere else to go. Because when you lose someone like Gloria, you pour everything you had for her into the one living piece of her you have left. And it worked. It actually worked. Derek got a full academic scholarship to the University of Illinois, then Northwestern Law. I stood outside that law school graduation with a disposable camera I'd bought at Walgreens, wearing a suit I'd rented from a place on Wentworth Avenue, and I watched my son walk across that stage, and 31 years of cold oatmeal at midnight, and doubles on holidays, and that coat finally made sense. That was the moment I thought. It was worth it. Every single bit of it. He disappeared slowly. That's the part I missed while it was happening. It wasn't dramatic. It was incremental visits became twice a year, then holidays only, then a text at Thanksgiving, then he married Cassandra, who ran what she described as an interior design, lifestyle brand, which appeared to consist of filming herself purchasing expensive objects in beautiful rooms and calling it work. They bought a 4-bedroom house in Hinsdale with a kitchen that probably cost more than I'd earned in 5 years. I told myself he was busy, successful. That's what you do when you love someone. You make excuses for the space that's opened up between you, because naming it feels like giving up. The chest tightness started in September. I told myself it was the old shoulder injury. Then I told myself it was stress. On a Tuesday morning in November, I walked out of my building to get the mail and never made it back inside. My downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Paulette Greer, a retired teacher who had been trying to get me to eat better for 6 years, found me on the sidewalk and called 911. The paramedics told me later I'd been on the ground for nearly 4 minutes. At the hospital, a cardiologist named Dr. Singh sat across from me and used words like severely occluded and quadruple bypass and significant surgical risk. She said if I'd waited another week, this conversation might not be happening. The procedure would cost nearly $50,000. Medicare and my supplemental coverage would handle most of it. but I would need someone with me for at least 2 weeks of recovery. I couldn't drive. I couldn't manage my own medications. I couldn't climb stairs without help. I called Derek. He picked up on the 7th ring. Noise in the background, voices, glasses clinking, music with that particular brightness of a catered event. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" Casual, light, like I'd called to ask about the weather. "I'm in the hospital," I said. "I need surgery. Heart surgery." The background noise went muffled. He'd stepped somewhere quieter. "Wait, what happened? When?" "They want to do it Friday." "Derek, I need you to be here." There was a pause. A significant one. "Dad, Friday is the worst possible timing. I'm closing on a $12 million commercial deal. I've been working this for 8 months. I might not make it to the weekend," I said. I kept my voice even. Not for effect. Just because it was true. Another pause. "You're going to be fine. You're strong. You raised me, didn't you? Get through the surgery and call me after. I'll come see you as soon as I can." He didn't come. The morning of my surgery, he sent a text. "Go get him, Dad." That was it. No call that night. No visit the next day. No message the day after. On day 2 of recovery, I tried calling him from the hospital phone. That's when I found out he'd blocked my number. I want to be honest with you right now, because this is the part of the story that I still have trouble saying out loud. When I found that out, lying in that bed with drainage tubes in my chest and the machines beeping their indifferent rhythms, something in me broke that surgery cannot fix. You can survive so many things in a life. Grief, poverty, physical pain, the grinding loneliness of a city that moves too fast to notice you. But the moment you understand that the one person you built everything for has looked at his phone, seen your name, and pressed a button to make you disappear, that is a different category of wound entirely. I lay in that bed and I thought about every double shift and every cold meal in that coat, and I thought, what was all of it for? Nothing good comes from staying in that thought too long. I know that now. On day 3, a nurse named Dominique came to review my discharge plan. She was the kind of nurse who has seen so much that she operates with complete, calm efficiency and a zero tolerance for people lying to themselves. "Mr. Webb," she said, scanning my file without looking up, "we need to arrange your transport home and confirm your post-discharge care setup." "I'll get a cab," I said. She looked up from the clipboard. "You live on 63rd Street. That's nearly 30 miles. Someone needs to be present with you for a minimum of 7 days. You can't self-medicate after a procedure like this, and you can't manage your own dressings. Who's your support? I'll figure something out." She studied me for a moment, the way nurses look at you when they've already identified the problem and are deciding whether to say it out loud. "I'll see what I can do," she said. "Let me make a call." I lay there after she left, feeling something I hadn't felt since the night after Gloria's funeral, completely helpless. I was 63 years old. I had driven a 30-ton vehicle through every kind of weather this city throws at you without flinching once. I had raised a son alone, built a quiet life out of almost nothing, and never not once asked anyone for help. And now I couldn't arrange a ride home. The man in the bed next to me had his entire extended family packed around him like a warm wall. His grandchildren had made get-well cards and taped them to the curtain. My side of the curtain had one card from Mrs. Greer. That was the loneliest moment of my life, and I've had some lonely moments. That's when Dr. Franklin Osei walked in. I'd met him briefly before the procedure, my surgeon, a tall man in his early 60s who had emigrated from Accra, Ghana, at 22, and who carried himself with the particular gravity of someone who has operated under pressure for so long that calm has become a permanent state. He usually moved through the floor with a team of residents trailing behind him. Today he came alone, pulled a chair to my bedside, and sat down with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has decided something. "How are you feeling, Mr. Webb?" Like someone took a crowbar to my sternum, I said. He allowed himself a brief, precise smile. "That's actually a more accurate description of cardiothoracic surgery than most of the textbooks I've used." He glanced at my chart. "Dominique tells me your discharge situation is complicated." "I'll manage," I said. He set the chart down and looked at me with the kind of stillness that comes from decades of reading faces under bright lights. "Mr. Webb, I'm going to speak to you directly because I believe you prefer that. Without post-operative support, the statistical likelihood of a readmission within 30 days for a patient in your situation is significant. Managing alone is not an option. It's a choice between recovery here and recovery in the ground. I didn't have an answer for that. He leaned forward slightly. I have a proposition. It's outside the normal parameters of patient care, but hear me out. I own a home in Lincoln Park, considerably more space than I use. I have a live-in medical aide who manages my own health maintenance. I'd like you to stay through your recovery period. Your own room, proper medical supervision, no cost. I stared at him. That's not why would you? He raised one hand slightly. Because 22 years ago, you stopped on the Eisenhower Expressway on the worst night of the worst January in a decade, and you made sure I got where I was going. Everything in the room went very quiet. I'd been driving home from a double on a Friday night, January, brutal cold, whiteout conditions. On the shoulder of the Eisenhower, a beat-up Civic had stopped dead in the left lane. A young man in a dress shirt and slacks was standing next to it, in conditions that would kill you in 40 minutes if you stood still. I pulled over, called a tow service, paid the driver $280 cash because the young man was shaking too hard to find his wallet, drove him to the budget car rental on Ogden, covered a week's rental. He kept trying to get my information, write down my name, thank me properly. I told him not to worry about it. I pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand, a note I'd written on the back of a CTA route schedule I had in my jacket pocket, and I drove away. I'd done things like that a handful of times over the years. Small interventions when someone was genuinely stuck. I never wanted thanks. I mostly forgot about them. Dr. Osei reached into the inner pocket of his white coat and took out his wallet. From inside it, he removed a piece of paper sealed in a small plastic sleeve. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone translucent. He held it up. I knew what it said. I could see it from the bed. We're all just trying to get somewhere. Keep going. I wrote that on the back of a CTA schedule I had in my pocket, I said softly. He nodded. I know. I was 2 weeks from withdrawing from my residency that night. My step board scores had come back below the threshold I needed. I was exhausted and broke, and I was working security shifts on weekends just to cover my rent. Standing on that shoulder in that blizzard, I thought, this is the universe telling me something. I was at the precise moment of quitting. He paused. Then a man in a bus driver's uniform stopped his car and covered my toe and drove me somewhere warm and handed me a note that said someone believed I'd get where I needed to go. I've kept that note in my wallet for 22 years. Through boards, through fellowship, through every hard week this career has given me. And when Dominique told me you had no family support and I looked at your intake file, I saw your name and I knew. I went home and confirmed it. Same man. Same South Side address. Same quiet act of kindness at the exact moment I needed it most. Some debts don't go away, Mr. Webb. They wait. I wanted to refuse. Pride is a peculiar and stubborn animal. Even when every rational option has been removed from the board, it still makes you want to say no to help. But I was tired in a way I couldn't argue myself out of. And the image of my apartment, the 3 steps into the building I could barely manage, the dressings I couldn't reach, the prescription bottles I'd have to organize alone, that image scared me in a way the surgery itself hadn't. Okay, I said. Thank you. He stood, straightened his coat. Get some rest. Robert will be here at 2 o'clock. The drive to Lincoln Park moved through neighborhoods I'd driven past for 30 years without ever entering. His house was pale brick and tall glass, set back behind a winter garden, 3 stories of quiet, deliberate elegance. A medical aide named Charles showed me to a first-floor bedroom larger than the combined living and sleeping space of my apartment. No stairs. Private bath. A fireplace I was afraid to turn on because it seemed like something that would change me in a way I wasn't ready for. I sat on the edge of that bed, and it was softer than anything I'd slept on in 20 years. And all I could think about was Derek, my son, who was presumably at that moment in his Hinsdale house, going through his evening without a single thought about where his father was laying his head tonight. That first night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, a soft knock came at the door. Franklin stood in the hallway in a bathrobe and reading glasses. May I? He sat in the armchair by the window, and we talked for 2 hours. Real talk, the kind that happens when it's dark and neither person has anything left to perform for. He told me about his wife Adeze, dead of breast cancer 3 years earlier. He told me about his estrangement from his older brother, who had appeared at Adaise's funeral with questions about her jewelry before the burial was finished. I told him about Gloria, about Derek, the boy he'd been, the man I'd raised, the space that had opened between us so gradually I'd almost managed to convince myself it wasn't there. I told him about the blocked number. Franklin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "In 30 years of cardiac surgery, the patients who recover fastest aren't always the ones who arrive in the best physical condition. They're the ones who have something to recover for. The heart is not only muscle, Leonard. It's meaning. Give it nothing to beat toward, and it finds a way to slow down on its own." I sat with that for a long time after he left. 10 days into my recovery, Derek called. He'd gotten the number through the hospital's patient liaison. "Dad, hey." His voice was easy, comfortable. The voice of someone who has decided that no time has passed. "How are you doing? Where are you staying?" "I'm with a friend," I said. "Recovering." "What friend?" He'd never really asked about my friendships. The question had a careful quality measured, the way lawyers learn to ask things. "You don't have friends," he stopped. "It doesn't matter. Cassandra and I want to come see you. This Sunday. The address is 412 Elsinore Court. Lincoln Park," I said. 1 o'clock. A pause. "Lincoln Park? Whose I'll see you Sunday," I said, and I ended the call before the next question. Franklin appeared in the hall a moment later. He'd heard from his study. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "I've made arrangements for Sunday," he said simply. And then he went back to his desk. Sunday arrived gray and cold with the smell of snow that hadn't committed to falling yet. At exactly 1 o'clock, the bell rang. I heard Derek's voice in the entryway loud, performatively warm, the voice people use when they're already composing their impression of a room. "Wow, this is incredible." Then Cassandra. "Derek, is that a look at the ceiling detail in here?" They came into the sitting room. Derek's eyes found Franklin standing by the window, and I watched his face run through its sequence. Recognition, assessment, recalibration. He stepped forward with a handshake that was slightly too vigorous. "Dr. Osei, from Northwestern Memorial. I've actually followed your published work on minimally invasive valve repair. This is really remarkable. The care you've taken with my father is genuinely above and beyond." Franklin met his eyes. "Your father and I have a long history." "We do?" Derek glanced at me, recalculating. "Dad, what does he mean?" Before I could answer, Cassandra was examining a small bronze figure on the side table. "Is this a cowrie?" Her voice had the particular brightness of someone who needs the room to know she can name things. I watched my son for the next 30 minutes as Cassandra talked, and Franklin answered her questions with a grace that somehow managed to be both warm and completely impenetrable. Derek orbited the room, constantly touching the back of chairs, pausing near artwork, returning to Franklin, always returning to Franklin. He sat next to me. His hand landed on my shoulder the first time he'd touched me in well over a year. "Dad, honestly, you look so much better than I expected." His voice was warm. But warmth can be manufactured and warmth can be earned, and I had spent 31 years learning to tell the difference. Franklin asked Derek if they could step into his study to discuss my ongoing care plan. I stayed with Cassandra, who had quietly begun photographing the room on her phone. I didn't stop her. I watched her, and I thought about something I hadn't expected to think about in that moment. I thought that what I was looking at was not a bad person. It was a person who had spent so long building the appearance of a life that she had forgotten to live one. The distinction matters. It's the difference between someone who needs to be condemned and someone who needs to be understood. I've had to make that distinction a lot in this story. In the study, Franklin closed the door behind them. I found out afterward, gradually, what happened in that room. Franklin had set his hands on the desk and looked at my son and said, calmly, "I know about the Westfield portfolio losses. I know about the refinancing on your Hinsdale property. I know Cassandra's brand has been losing sponsors for 7 months. I know you are roughly 45 days from a default conversation with your bank." Derek had gone completely still. "You had no right," Franklin had replied. "I had every right to understand who abandoned a friend under my care." He'd slid a folder across the desk. Inside it was a check for $60,000. The conditions were 3. The money was for genuine financial stabilization, not for maintaining an appearance. Derek was to repair his relationship with his father, not because he was being observed, but because it was the right thing to do. and he was never to approach Leonard or Franklin for financial assistance again. This was a bridge across a crisis, not a foundation for the future. Derek asked why Franklin would do any of this. "Because your father would want me to help you," Franklin said. "Even now, even after everything, he loves you. I am doing this for him, not for you. If you want to walk out that door and go back to being the man who blocked his father's number, this check stays in this folder. Choose." What Franklin didn't tell Derek, what he told me quietly that evening, after they'd gone, was that the check would not clear for 6 months. If Derek reverted, if he went back to silence and distance and careful calculation, the check would bounce. Derek would have spent half a year believing he had a safety net, only to discover the net was woven from choices. "That's ruthless," I said. Franklin considered this. "That's accountability," he said. "There's a meaningful difference." Before Derek and Cassandra left, my son and I walked out into the winter garden. We sat on a stone bench, and Derek stared at the dormant earth for a long time without speaking. He had an expression I recognized but hadn't seen in years, the look of someone who has finally stopped running from something and has turned around to face it. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Tell me." "I've been ashamed," he said. His voice was quieter than I'd heard it in a decade. "Of what?" "Of failing you." He looked at his hands. "You gave up everything for me. You drove a bus through 30 Chicago winters so I could have a life you never had. And I built this career, this house, this version of myself, and then it started to collapse. And I couldn't face you. Because facing you meant admitting I'd wasted what you sacrificed. So instead of coming to you, you disappeared." He nodded. "It was the coward's way." "Yes, exactly." He finally looked at me. "And then when I found out where you were staying, I thought." He stopped. "You thought you could use me," I said quietly. He didn't look away. He didn't deny it. Real tears look different from social ones. They carry a stillness, a kind of physical surrender, like the person has finally stopped bracing against something. His eyes filled up. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what I thought." He exhaled. "I don't know how to undo it. I don't know if I deserve to try." I thought about the morning after Gloria's funeral. Derek was 9 years old. He came into my room at 5 in the morning and climbed into my bed without saying anything and lay there. After a while he said, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" And I didn't know. I genuinely did not know what the answer was. But I looked at this 9-year-old boy with his mother's eyes and I said yes, because we have each other. And then I chose to mean it every single day for the next 25 years. I said to Derek on that garden bench, "I chose you every single day, even the days it cost me. That's not a debt you owe me. That's just what love is. It's a daily choice, not a feeling you either have or don't. You hurt me, son. You hurt me more deeply than I knew I could still be hurt. But you are still my son. And if you want to repair this, not because of any check, not because of any house or any doctor or any strategy, but because you actually want your father back, then I am here. I'm right here. Are you?" He nodded. He couldn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "I want that. I genuinely want that." "Good," I said. "Then call me Tuesday." He called Tuesday. He called Thursday. He drove out alone the following Sunday without Cassandra, without any performance, and we walked the winter garden for 3 hours and talked about things we had never found language for before. His fear of being ordinary. His shame at having wanted more than I'd had, as though wanting were a betrayal. My own unprocessed grief, the way Gloria's death had made me pour everything I had into Derek because it was the only place left to put the love. We talked about therapy. He'd started. He said it was the hardest thing he'd done. I said hard is usually where the real work lives. 6 months later, on a Wednesday morning in June, Franklin's attorney called me. "Mr. Webb, I'm calling to inform you that the disbursement associated with Derek Webb has cleared. All conditions were met." I sat with that for a moment. Then I told Derek that Sunday. His face moved through about 6 different expressions in the space of 10 seconds. "You knew the whole time?" "The whole time. And you didn't say anything to me? Would it have changed anything?" He was quiet for a while. Then honestly, "No, actually no. I needed to do this because I wanted to, not because money was waiting." He looked at me, which means I actually did. Franklin had been right about the heart and what it needs to beat for. In the 2 years after my surgery, something in my body changed that had nothing to do with the bypasses. I started sleeping deeply again. The pain in my joints eased in a way my doctors attributed to recovery, and I attributed to not being lonely anymore. Franklin and I fell into a rhythm: coffee in the morning, dinner at 7, Tuesday evenings watching old films and arguing about which ones actually held up. He introduced me to his colleagues and his friends, and he introduced me as his family. Not his patient, not his charity case. His family. Over 8 years, we traveled to places I'd spent 3 decades driving a bus past on television. Nairobi, where Franklin had relatives who fed us for 4 days and laughed at how long it had taken him to bring a friend home. Lisbon in October, which is the most beautiful city I have ever seen. Osaka in cherry blossom season, which I didn't believe was real until I was standing in it. We were there the night Derek and Cassandra's daughter was born, a girl they named Gloria, after her grandmother. I held that baby in a hospital, in the same city where I had lain alone 3 years earlier, and I thought about how the same place can mean entirely different things depending on who is in the room with you. Franklin passed on a Sunday morning in February, at 79. He had been declining slowly for 6 months, and in that last stretch I showed up every day. I sat in the chair by his bed the way Dominique had noticed. Nobody sat in the chair by mine. His funeral drew hundreds former patients, colleagues, medical students, who had received grants from the foundation he'd built. I sat in the front row. Derek was beside me. At one point, without looking over, he said quietly, "He changed both our lives, didn't he?" I said, "He showed us what was already in us." The will reading was in a downtown office on a Tuesday morning. Franklin had left generous trust funds for his niece and nephews in Accra, substantial donations to Northwestern's cardiac surgery research program, endowment for a first-generation medical student scholarship, and everything else: the house in Lincoln Park, 3 medical office buildings on the North Shore, his full investment portfolio to Leonard James Webb. The total figure made the room very quiet. The attorney handed me an envelope. "Dr. Osei asked that you receive this when the time came." Franklin's handwriting was careful and unhurried, the way everything about him had been. "Leonard, 22 years ago you stopped on a highway in January for a stranger with nothing. You didn't leave your name. You didn't stay for thanks. You just made sure I got where I was going. I've thought about that night more times than I can count. Not because of the tow truck or the car rental, because of what it meant that you stopped. Because in a city of 3 million people, one man in a bus driver's uniform saw another man standing in the cold and didn't stop to calculate the cost. He just stopped. I have spent my entire career trying to live up to that standard. Some days I've gotten close, some days I haven't. I'm leaving you everything because I believe you'll use it the way it was meant to be used, not to accumulate, to give. Somewhere in this city tonight, there is a young person standing at the edge of quitting something they were born to do. Find them, leave them a note, tell them someone believes in them. That's the only instruction I have. Everything else, you already know. With love and gratitude, your brother, Franklin." I still live in Franklin's house. My house now, though some mornings it still doesn't feel that way, which I think is the right relationship to have with a thing like this. Derek comes every Sunday with Gloria, who is 4 years old and has her great-grandmother's eyes and an absolute refusal to find anything boring. She calls me Grandpa Len, and demands I tell her about the bus routes, which she finds inexplicably fascinating. I have been telling her the same 3 CTA stories for 8 months, and she has not grown tired of them yet. The foundation in Franklin's name has provided grants to 93 medical students in the 4 years since his death. Every grant comes with an envelope. Inside is a handwritten note. It says, "We're all just trying to get somewhere. Keep going." I've left anonymous envelopes in buildings across this city, usually $500, sometimes more. I'll never know which ones arrive at the right moment. I hope one of them is in someone's hands right now. This story taught me something I wish I had understood 40 years earlier. We measure love by what it looks like, the grand gestures, the announcements, the visible sacrifices. But real love is almost always invisible. It's the decision you make when nobody is watching and nothing is guaranteed. It's stopping on a highway in January. It's choosing to sit in a chair by someone's bed when you have no obligation to be there, except that you want to be. The mistake most of us make is waiting for the moment to feel convenient. Real moments are never convenient. They are just moments. And what you decide to do with them is the whole story. The people you help quietly don't always come back. I want to be honest about that. Most of the time you give something and it disappears into the city and you never know where it went. But sometimes, if you're very lucky, or if the universe is paying a particular kind of attention, it comes back, 30 years later, at the exact moment you need it most. If you've ever given everything to someone who didn't show up when you called, I want you to hear this. You did not waste it. Whatever you poured into that person, it went somewhere. You don't always get to watch where the current takes what you put into the water, but it goes. It always goes. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a number in the comments, 1, 2, or 3. 1 if you think Derek deserved forgiveness and Leonard made the right call. 2 if you think forgiveness came too easily and Derek should have had to work harder for it. 3 if you think the conditional check was actually the most brilliant part of this whole story, because honestly, when Franklin told me about it, I sat with that for a very long time. I want to know where you're watching this from right now, and what time it is there. And I want to know, have you ever given someone a second chance that genuinely surprised you? Tell me in the comments. Because your answer might be exactly what someone else scrolling past this at midnight needs to read tonight. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you haven't called in too long, or someone you've been too proud to reach out to, please subscribe. I tell stories like this every week. Stories about what it actually costs to love someone, and what it looks like when that love, against all reasonable odds, finds its way back. The subscribe button is right there, and I'll see you in the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Chicago, Illinois, to create completely original content. Any resemblance to real persons, events, or institutions is entirely coincidental.